Hello, this is Daniel Johnston, and in this video, I'm going to be taking you through an overview of the state of AI models as of June 2025. So we're going to be talking about the different AI labs, the different models, and which are the best for different use cases. So this video is for people who are not power users of AI, but maybe you've used AI a lot, maybe you use ChatGPT, you've used Claude, or maybe you haven't really gotten into using AI yet, and you're wondering, okay, what are really the best models that I should use right now? What do I need to know? So this is going to be a high-level overview of all of that. So let's get started. So here's a list of the major labs. So at the top here, we have OpenAI. Of course, they make ChatGPT. They have the vast majority of the market share at this point. I believe they were really the first, and they're the ones that most people think about. Now, next we have Anthropic. Anthropic was started largely by employees who broke away from OpenAI, and they have the Claude model, which is particularly good for programming. Now, next we have DeepMind/Google. So DeepMind is a subsidiary of Google, and they have the Gemini model, which has really burst on the scene in the last few months as arguably the best model out there right now. Next, we have DeepSeek. They, of course, are a Chinese company. They are open source, and they are the best open source lab out there right now. Of course, they made quite a lot of noise about 6 months ago when they came out with DeepSeek v3 and DeepSeek R1. So next we have xAI, which is of course run by Elon Musk, and they have the Grok model. They leveled up a few months ago when they released Grok 3. And next we have Meta, of course Facebook, and they have the Llama model, and they have always been open source. They were the best open source model until DeepSeek took that mantle from them. And then we have Alibaba, another Chinese company. They have Qwen. So here's a tier list of labs. Now, this is my personal ranking. Other people may disagree. Other people would probably do this slightly differently, but I think this in general makes sense. So S tier, we have ChatGPT and Gemini, and these two companies really have the best overall models out there at this point, and also not just in terms of text, but also in terms of audio, and in Gemini's case, in terms of video. These are really the companies that are leading the way. Now, in terms of the A tier, Anthropic, I think you could make a strong case for moving up to S tier because they do have probably the best coding model at this point. But really, they're focusing very heavily on programming, and their model is really not quite as good at other things, and so that's why I'd put them in A tier. And then DeepSeek, I would say DeepSeek is probably closer to, they're really a low A tier, and Anthropic might be like A plus tier if we were going to create more tiers of these. DeepSeek is a very good lab. They're doing a lot of very good research, and I do expect them to keep making new improvements. And like I said, they do have the best open source models. At the same time, I think that they are still behind these other three top labs. Now, next we have xAI and Grok. Now, this model is pretty good. Their strategy really seems to be throwing a ton of compute at the model. I think that in terms of expertise, in terms of the researchers that they have, I think they have some great researchers, but I think they're quite a bit behind the other labs, and I think it's going to be difficult for them to catch up. Now, in C tier, we have Qwen. Qwen is very good in terms of small models. So they released a new family of models recently, and their small models were excellent for the size, and so they're very good if you want to do fine-tuning or if you want to run something on your local machine. They're very good. I think their models were also fine-tuned specifically to be good at math, but for most use cases you wouldn't really use them. And then unfortunately in D tier we have Meta. Their Llama 4 model released. I was personally pretty excited for it, and it ended up being a pretty big disappointment, unfortunately. So they're going through some trouble. It seems like they're throwing around hundreds of millions of dollars to try to hire new researchers and restructure their team. So hopefully they'll come back strong. Now, next, so this is the question that I think people really want to know. This is, which model should you use? And the answer, as in so many things, is that it depends. It depends on how much money you want to spend. It depends on the speed of your answer. So do you want an answer that's pretty good fast, or do you want like a super, super good answer slowly? So obviously that's going to depend on the question and how important accuracy is. And then the use case. The use case is super important. As I said, some models are good for programming. Some are good at more language tasks. So that's going to really make a big difference. And another important thing to note here is that evaluating models is much more difficult now than it used to be. One reason for that is that a lot of the benchmarks that we use to measure models are saturated. And so what that means is that basically all of the models are scoring very high on these benchmarks, and so it's difficult to differentiate between them. Also, we have so many benchmarks now, and often they tell us slightly different things. So we have a good idea of which model is, like which few models are the best for a given use case, but it's really hard to say, oh, this model is definitely the best for this, even for a specific use case, because there are often a few models that are pretty close. So here is one benchmark. Of course, there are many, many benchmarks. Literally, there are dozens, hundreds of them. But this is one that I think is pretty accurate in general. And this is really a good summary of these different models. So the context window, that tells you how much input you can put in. So all of this is in terms of tokens. A token in general is about 3/4 of a word. So you can just think of it as words. And so, for instance, at the top here, we have O3 Pro, and the context window is 200K. So this means basically it can take in 150,000 words of input, right? So if you have a book that's like 150,000 words, you can put that book in and then ask it different questions about that. So then the intelligence index, that tells you, that's a score for overall how smart this model is according to this benchmark. And I do think this is quite accurate. And then the blended, what that is it tells you the average cost of using this model per 1 million tokens. And the blended, what that means is that it's calculating, because usually there's a different price for the input tokens versus the output tokens. And what the blend is doing is it's putting those things together. So basically, so you can see Gemini 2.5 Pro versus O3 Pro. Gemini 2.5 Pro is much less expensive by a factor of 10 and is about as intelligent, and also the context window is much bigger. So now the next question is, what's the best free model? So my answer is it's either Gemini 2.5 Flash or ChatGPT 4o. So the main benefit to Gemini 2.5 Flash is that it's overall a bit more intelligent, 53 versus 50 on artificial analysis. At that level, it's kind of hard to tell, but it probably is a little bit smarter. It has better integration with Google Drive. So you can connect both ChatGPT and Gemini to Google Drive, but it works better with Gemini, which makes sense because it's run by Google. And with Gemini, it can search your Google Drive files automatically, whereas with ChatGPT, you usually have to go and actually select them. So Gemini works better for that. I've found that to be quite useful if you already have a lot of stuff in your Google Drive already. And another thing is that it's less sycophantic. So unfortunately, some models will be very sycophantic in terms of telling you, oh, this is a great idea. Like, very few people are this smart. They'll really gas you up. And Gemini does that noticeably less than other models. Now, with their most recent releases, they are doing it more, which I think is unfortunate, but it still is less than 4o. Now, there are a couple benefits to 4o, and honestly, I would say I still would use 4o if I were gonna just use a free model, because it does have a better memory system. So what this means is that ChatGPT, it automatically will store things that you talk about with it and it will then go back and reference past conversations when you're talking to it in the future. So it does this even for the free tier. And Gemini does have a memory system, but you have to do it manually. Whereas with 4.0, it does it automatically. And so, like, I think that's pretty cool that it already knows stuff about you, and you don't have to keep repeating information that it already knows. And the other thing is that 4.0 is seemingly more emotionally intelligent. So this table on the right, this is something called EQ bench. So this is they have some very good benchmarks there, and this is a measure of how emotionally intelligent these different models are. So what's important is the thing on the far right. ChatGPT 4.0 is actually very close to the top. It has a 1300 ELO score, whereas Gemini 2.5 Flash, it has a 1044 ELO score. So that is a very big difference. And yeah, so if you're talking more about day-to-day emotional stuff, 4.0 I think will often give you a better response. Now, I really would go with one of these two. Unfortunately, Claude, they have a much lower message limit, and so you're probably going to run up on that very quickly, so I wouldn't really recommend using it in the free tier. I would go with either Gemini 2.5 Flash or ChatGPT 4.0. So next, reasoning models. So reasoning models leverage something called chain of thought, which has the LLM think before it provides an answer. So it's slower because of that, right? Because what'll happen is you'll ask it a question, and then it'll actually think about it, and you can see the reasoning traces, because the chain of thought, like literally, it's like the thinking that the model is doing, and you can see how it's coming to the answer that it ultimately gives, which is pretty cool. And reasoning models, they're smarter and they're much better at problem-solving tasks. So math, programming, if you're analyzing a complex text, reasoning models are much, much better. So anything where the accuracy is important, you should absolutely be using a reasoning model. You should not just be using the base models, because they are far inferior. Now, reasoning models, generally, you do have to pay for them. One reason for that is that the output tokens are a lot greater, because this chain of thought, that's output tokens. And so every query, it's outputting a chain of thought, and that costs quite a bit of money. And so you do have to generally pay for it. It's not expensive in absolute terms, though. For $20 a month, you can get pretty much all the reasoning that you want, and I would say it's absolutely worth it. So for ChatGPT 4.0, that is not a reasoning model. 0.3 and 0.4 are, and yes, it's very confusing that they have 0.4 and 4.0, but yeah, you'll get used to it. Now, Gemini and Claude, they have both reasoning and non-reasoning versions. So like Gemini 2.5 Flash that we talked about, it can either reason or not, depending on the situation. And actually, the free version of it, it can use reasoning, but in my experience, it doesn't really use the reasoning very much. So it's definitely a nerf version of it compared to if you use the paid tier. So now, what are the best reasoning models? So overall, the best are Gemini 2.5 Pro, 0.3 and 0.4 Mini High, and Claude Opus 4. So yeah, so Gemini 2.5 Pro, that's Google's top model, and 0.3 and 0.4 Mini High. So those are different generations of ChatGPT's reasoning model. 0.3 is probably still the best, and then 0.4 Mini, that's basically a smaller version of their next generation of reasoning models. So 0.4 will ultimately be better than 0.3, but we only have the smaller version right now. So right now they're about equivalent, and then Claude Opus 4, that's their biggest and best model. So for most reasoning tasks, you should use either Gemini 2.5 Pro or 0.3, 0.4 Mini High. I think they're both quite good. You can't go wrong either way. Now, for tasks requiring a long context window, use 0.3. So this is a table from Fiction Live Bench, and they do a very good benchmark here, which is that they measure how good a model is at retaining information depending on how many tokens it's given. Right, so we saw in that table earlier, over here, it tells us the context window of how many tokens it can take in. But just because it can take in that many tokens doesn't mean it's actually using it correctly, right? So Gemini 2.5 Pro, it can take in 1 million tokens, but if you actually give it a million tokens, is it going to really remember all of that and use it correctly? Well, probably not, right? The answer is no, according to this table. So according to this table, O3 is the best in terms of maintaining things over a long context. And then Gemini 2.5 Pro is also quite good, especially the new one that they just released a few weeks ago. But yeah, O3 still seems to be the best according to this table, and the other models are just way, way behind. So now we're going to talk about the best programming models. Now, Claude, as I said, they're generally considered the best for programming. Now, Opus versus Sonnet. So Sonnet is a smaller version, and Opus is a bigger version. So Opus is better. It's also more expensive. And Claude is more expensive than other models in general. But for programming, if you're using it especially if you're using it for a job or a startup or something like that, it's definitely worth it. And Gemini 2.5 Pro is also very good for coding. And in my experience, Claude is the best at generating code, and Gemini is the best at debugging. But this is just my personal intuition, so it may not be accurate. Now, there are a lot of different programming tools that you can use. So you could simply go into the chat window and paste in your code and ask it to help you with it. And this will work okay, but this is definitely not recommended. And what you can do instead is you can actually get these models to help you program directly in your IDE or a terminal. And you can do this even if you're not a great programmer, because all you have to do is tell the model what to do, and it'll build it for you. So you don't even have to know much about programming to actually have it do some really cool stuff. Now, they will run into trouble at some points, and if you do know about programming, that is a huge plus, and I would highly recommend learning that as well. But you don't need to know that much to get a lot out of these models. So these are some of the options: Claude Code, Cursor, Codex, Windsurf, VS Code plus Copilot. So I have not had extensive experience with all of these, so I couldn't make a clear recommendation. I would say Claude Code seems to be the most popular right now, followed by Cursor. So those two are the top ones, and then Codex is OpenAI's tool, so you get that with their Plus tier, and it uses O3. VS Code plus Copilot, it kind of gives you more. It gives the programmer a little bit more control in general, whereas Cursor is more agentic. But so I'd recommend trying out these different tools and seeing which one you like the best. And this is definitely, it is much, much better than programming on your own. I studied computer science myself in college. Well, I graduated with a math degree, but I studied computer science quite a bit, and I've done quite a lot of programming, and using these AI tools have completely skyrocketed my productivity. So highly recommended. Now, the next question is, what are the best subscriptions out there? So I highly recommend subscribing to either Gemini Pro or ChatGPT Plus. And this is in bold because I really do recommend it. Both are $20 a month. And for $20 a month, the benefits are very well worth it. So this will give you access to the reasoning models, image test, video generation, deep research, etc. I'll talk about deep research in a second. So personally, I would go with ChatGPT Plus if I had to choose, but either one is good. And their next tier plan is $200, but I wouldn't really recommend that for most people. I think the main reason it might make sense to do that is for Claude Code. Their Claude Max plan, I think, is $200, and you can just use it pretty much as you want, I believe. And if you are a programmer by profession, that may be worth it. Otherwise, I wouldn't drop $200 on a plan. I guess the other main case where it may be worth it is if you're generating videos, and we'll talk about that in a second. So deep research, like I just mentioned. So deep research is a very powerful AI tool built on top of reasoning models. And given a topic, it generates an in-depth research report complete with citations. And these reports are very good. They're often at the level of a strong graduate student. Like if you just want um, like if you want some good research, good thoughts on a topic, a good summary of what's out there, or if you wanted to maybe help you generate some new ideas that you could potentially pursue, I highly recommend this. It is, it's pretty much the most intelligent single use of an AI that you can get at this point. And ChatGPT, Gemini, and Claude, they all have deep research in their $20 a month plan. I am not really sure which one is the best. I mostly use ChatGPT Deep Research, and it's excellent. Now, the best video generation. Currently, Google's VO3 is the best by far. It caused a bit of a stir when it was released because it's very good. However, there are some new competitors that are still in preview, but they may be coming out soon that are also excellent. Google's previous generation VO2 is also good. So with Gemini Pro, you can access, you get access to 1,000 tokens a month for generating videos, and so that'll give you about 10 videos with VO3 or 100 with VO2. And what I was saying with their more advanced plan is that with Gemini Ultra, which I believe is $200 a month as well, you get access to many more, to generating many more videos. So if you're a professional making videos, that may be worth it. Now, the best audio models. So for speech to text, the best model seems to be OpenAI Whisper. It's very accurate in my experience. For, that should say text to speech. For text to speech model, the best is OpenAI TTS1 HD. You can customize the voices, and it's quite good. Now, 11 Labs, you could argue, is better quality. However, it is on the order of 10 times more expensive. I believe I read that they are reducing some of their pricing, and so it may become a more realistic option in the near future. And best open source models. So open source models are great for fine-tuning, running locally, or for getting around content blockers. As I said before, DeepSeek is the best open source lab. Their standard model is V30324, and their reasoning model is R10528. Both are excellent. Llama 4 is cheap and fast, but it's not very intelligent. And Qwen is decent at math. Their small models are extremely good for their size. And DeepSeek and Qwen, they're both Chinese. They're both owned by Chinese companies. And if you don't want to give your data to Chinese companies, you can use them from non-Chinese providers. Because since these are open source models, it means that anybody can deploy and run them. And so there are a number of non-Chinese companies that you can use these models from and protect your data. So for fine-tuning, what this means basically is that you take a model that already exists and then you give it, you train it on new data, and it updates to be good specifically at a task. So for instance, if you want to take a model and make it good at answering a specific kind of math question, what you could do is you could feed it like a few thousand math questions and then train it on those. So that's something that you do need to know a little bit more about how LLMs work and machine learning in general in order to do. And running locally, yeah, you can, especially the smaller models, like Qwen has some good small models. You can run these locally if you have a decent computer. So wrapping up, the best free model is ChatGPT 4.0 or Gemini 2.5 Flash. The best subscription is ChatGPT Plus or Gemini Pro. The best for coding is Claude. The best for overall reasoning problems like math problems, science problems, even philosophy problems, stuff like that, O3, O4 Mini High or Gemini 2.5 Pro. And then coming up this summer, it appears that GPT-5 is likely to be released in July. So I'm excited for that. It sounds like they're going to be unifying their reasoning models and their non-reasoning models into one thing, similar to what Claude and Gemini have already done. And then Grok 3.5 is, well, it was supposed to be released a while ago. It sounds like it will be released soon, so we'll see if they manage to catch up. So exciting summer coming up, exciting models, and let me know any questions that you have.